Morning, I'm Alan Lilly, presiding hearing officer of the State Water Board's Administrative Hearings Office. This is the status conference regarding the pending change petition that was filed by the city of Solvang in 2015 for its water right permit 15878. We are recording this status conference through a Zoom recording, and we will post the files, audio and audio plus video of this recording on the AHO FTP site soon. Usually takes us a day to get it downloaded, and we'll try to get it posted tomorrow. We also are broadcasting the status conference by YouTube Live, and we'll post that YouTube recording on the AHO webpage, which is part of the State Water Board's website. So since the June 29 status conference, the Administrative Hearings Office received letters from Chip Woolbrandt, attorney for City of Solvang, dated August 7 and September 18, 2020. A letter dated September 9, 2020 from Gary Vidstad, attorney for Improvement District Number 1. Status conference statements dated September 21 from attorneys for Caltrout, CDFW, National Marine Fisheries, and Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District, and a joint status conference statement dated September 22 from the attorneys for Improvement District Number 1 and Alisal Guest Ranch. Solvang did file its status conference statement 4 days late, and I appreciate the other parties filing their statements before today. All of these filings have helped me prepare for today's conference and will make it more efficient. So with that, I see some of you are appearing here on the Zoom printout, which I appreciate. There are a couple of numbers, telephone numbers, and we would like to convert those to names just because that does help us with the recording to have those names. So first of all, there's one number, it begins with an area code 206 and ends with 214. If you can unmute and tell me who you are, that would be great.
Yes, Mr. Lilly, this is Lori Beal. I'm with the NOAA General Counsel's office, and I'm representing NOAA Fisheries in this matter. And I'll just mention, as I noted in the email, that the government had been barred from using Zoom video. Actually, just yesterday, we received word that there are ways we can access the video, but I didn't have time during that amount of time because there are a number of restrictions to figure out how to use the video, but for future meetings, we should be able to join you by video. So we appreciate your patience there. Thank you.
Yes, and I certainly understand. And for a status conference, audio is not as big of a problem as it is for a hearing. Obviously, when we get to witnesses testifying, we like to have everyone video plus audio. But for today, that's certainly fine. So we will see if we can convert, just enter Lori Beal instead of 206. Asterisk, 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 and so forth. It looks like we've done that, so that's good. All right, and then we do have a phone number that's 1562 and ends with 204. Who is that? I was going to get the 562 204 one first, if that person can unmute. Okay, so far they are not unmuting, so they can be stealth for now. And then we do have 805 ending in 869. Who is that? Please speak.
Gary Kvistad.
Okay, so Gary Kvistad, 805 and ending in 869, and we'll change that to your name. And
thank you.
It looks like we also have an audio for you, although we don't, I just see a ceiling there. Yeah. I don't know if that's you as well.
I was having trouble with the audio on my computer, so I dialed in on the phone.
Okay, you might want to adjust the camera on your video so we're not just seeing your ceiling. We'd like to see your face if you can.
I'm at a computer that I don't have video on.
Oh, okay. We have a video screen with blank, so that's fine. We're working out the bugs, and we'll get there.
Okay.
But that's fine, Mr. Vidstad. We're certainly glad to have you participate, and we'll convert your phone number to a name if we can here. Looks like that's been done. My staff is really good. Okay. I don't know if 562 ending in 204 wants to say anything. We haven't heard from you yet. I don't hear anything yet. And I am a little concerned. I don't see Mr. Wolbrandt. Is there anybody here for the city of Solvang?
Yes, Mr. Lilly.
Oh, okay. We do have Matt
this is-
Vanderlyn. Yes, please, Mr. Vanderlyn, please go ahead.
Well, I'm actually Mr. Wolbrandt.
I'm sorry, we could hear you, but then you faded out. So can you get a little closer to your microphone and try again? I think you may be voice activated. Go
Sure.
ahead, Mr.
Yes, I'm Mr. Wolbrandt, sitting at Mr. Vanderlinden's desk. Mr. Vanderlinden is also here with me.
Okay, so what we'll do if our staff can is we'll change. I think this is the first time we've seen you in person, but good morning, Mr. Wolbrandt. So we'll change the name if we can on the recording so it has Chip Wolbrandt instead, since you'll probably be doing most of the talking. And then if Mr. Vanderlyn wants to say something, just let us know, and we'll just have that noted for the record. Okay, let me just, with that, let's just go down the list here quickly. I think I know most of you, but I just want to make sure we have all the appearances in. So again, if you can start or repeat, Mr. Wolbrandt, who's here for the city of Solvang?
Chip Wolbrandt, city attorney, and Matt Vanderlinden, public works director and city engineer.
Okay, and then for Cal Trout?
Good morning, just Maggie Hall for California Trout.
Good morning, Ms. Hall. And for National Marine Fisheries, Ms. Buell, if you can just repeat your appearance, please.
Yes, my name is Lori Beal, and I'm with the NOAA Office of General Counsel for NOAA Fisheries. I was expecting Darren Brumbach to also join. I don't know if he perhaps was having trouble with the mute and is the unidentified number, but I don't know for certain. Thank you.
So, Mr. Brumbach, are you by any chance the 562 telephone number?
Yes, Mr. Lilly. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're great now. We didn't hear you before, but now you're fine.
Okay, perfect. I am the 562 area code. My name is Darren Brumbach with NOAA Fisheries.
All right, and thank you. We're always happy to have a name associated with a telephone number, even if we don't get video from you today. So good morning. And then for California Fish and Wildlife?
Good morning. This is Nancy Murray, staff counsel for CDFW. I think it's just me today.
Okay. Good morning, Ms. Murray. Improvement District number 1.
Gary Kavistad with Brownstein Hyatt Farber Shack for ID1.
All right. Thank you. And Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District?
Kevin Walsh, Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District.
All right. And I think I see Mr. Garcia as well. Is he here for the district as well? Mr. Garcia, do you want to go off mute and just acknowledge that you're here? Or are you stuck on mute?
I was stuck on mute. I apologize for that. I am here. Good morning. Thank you.
All right, good morning. So I think that covers everybody there. In case you're wondering about the other names, Amy Blunt, Skylar Anderson, Nicole Mullen, Megan Nyes, and Kyle Wooldridge are from my office. And obviously, as you can tell already, I couldn't possibly run these hearings without their assistance. And I appreciate their help very much. So I think that's.
Sorry,
Ms. Diaz. I'm sorry. Who are you appearing for, Ms. Diaz?
Good morning, Mr. Lilly. Jessica Diaz with the law firm of Brownstein Hyatt Farber Shack. I'm here on behalf of LSL Guest Ranch. My co-counsel Stephanie Hastings couldn't make it this morning.
I'm sorry. Did I skip over LSL before?
No problem at all.
It's on my list here, but I'm trying to not just read. I'm trying to look at the camera too. Anyway, I apologize, Ms. Diaz. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. So I think that has everybody here. And first of all, thank you all very much for appearing this morning, and also for filing your status conference statements. That's very helpful. So I'm going to just tell you where I am on this right now, and certainly would appreciate your comments and input, and we'll be asking questions as well. So first of all, regarding settlement, the status conference statements indicate that the parties have had some discussions regarding potential settlements of the pending issues. And I certainly want to encourage all of you to continue to have those discussions and to resolve as many issues as you can. Having said that, I'm going to move forward, trying to move this matter toward a hearing and toward a proposed order. I realize we have some steps to get there, but I want to keep it moving forward. So any settlement discussions certainly may proceed and should proceed, but they'll be on a parallel track. And I will ask for updates regarding the party settlement discussions, but I'm not going to delay my proceedings because of potential settlements. Frankly, I think if we continue to move forward toward a hearing, I mean, I know it's a stressful situation, but I think that may facilitate progress towards settlement, because I think there's some fairly important substantive issues that we need progress on before, from what I can tell from your statements, before we're likely to see any final settlements. So with that, I'm going to just a couple of questions for you, Mr. Wolbrandt. Based on your August 7 letter, my understanding is that Solvang has withdrawn its petition for extension of time that it filed in 2015 and has narrowed the petition for changes in points of diversion that it filed in 2015. And specifically, the 2015 change petition contained a proposed reach of diversion that would have run from a point C on the map filed with your letter to point E, but then based on your letter, it appears that the city now has shortened this reach of diversion, so it will run from point F to point E. And I'm just going upstream to downstream when I say those points. So Mr. Wolbrandt, have I correctly stated both of those changes to the Solvang's 2015 change petition?
Mr. Lilly, you have. Thank you.
Okay, so we will, since the city has formally made those changes, we will confirm those in our next order. And I appreciate that. I think it is helpful to narrow those issues. It narrows the hearing issue somewhat already, and that certainly will facilitate our process going forward. So then, now, Mr. Wolbrandt, based on your September 18 letter, my understanding is that the city is proposing some monthly pumping limits and maximum pumping rates that are listed in the table that was enclosed with your letter. So far, from what I read in your letter, those are just proposals. The city hasn't formally asked to amend the change petition to incorporate those. Is that correct? And just make sure to go off mute. There we go.
Mr. Lilly, that is also correct. We have presented those to the other interested parties. We're seeking input on that. We also are in particular seeking input on the reach, what we call area B of the downstream reach, and are hoping, in fact, I will say I'm excited that Mr. Brumbach is on the call today. He's one of the ones that we were hoping to get input back on that reach B area. And so if in fact those pumping regimes seem to address issues raised, then the city would be willing to impose those on itself and have the state board impose them.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. Could you just repeat those last two sentences?
Yes. We have presented those for comment from the other interested parties with the expectation that if they address the issues of concern, the city would incorporate those in its application.
Okay. So I think we have a little bit of a sequencing question here. And oh, excuse me, Mr. Kvidstad, do you want to say something, or were you just clicking?
No, I wasn't doing anything.
Okay, yeah, your light came on, excuse me, but anyway. So Mr. Wolbrandt, I just want to first say I appreciate the progress you and the city of Solvang are making. I know you're working hard on this under difficult circumstances, and this does seem like a step forward. But here's where I am right now. I would like to firm up the new project description, which presumably would include those the monthly pumping limits and maximum diversion rates, because that then would be the project that we would consider for subsequent analysis and for the hearing. So I guess my question for you is, Solvang willing to unilaterally amend the petition to make those changes, or is it hoping to do those as part of some kind of agreement or agreements with the other parties?
Mr. Lilly, and with all respect to all involved here, I was given direction from my city council several months ago to try to have this become I'm going to call it a less attorney-driven process. We have sought to have more principal to principal, I've called them, discussions. So far, we have not been able to have any of those. And so we're in some ways shooting in the dark. That's clearly not unusual in these types of proceedings, especially ones that last for decades. That all said, I just confirmed with our public works director that the city would be willing. I need to take this to the council, obviously, to get their approval, but the city would be willing to recommend to the council, and if approved, to incorporate those in our application. And I believe that we could do that this coming Monday evening.
You're meeting with the city councilors on Monday?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and you say application, I assume you mean the petition.
I'm sorry, I mean the petition.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yes.
All right, so that would be helpful.
Mr.
So we'll
Lilly?
talk about a schedule, and I certainly understand. Oh, excuse me, it looks like
Yeah,
Mr. Vanderlyn.
Yes, hi, Mr. Lilly, if I could just add. So
Please, go ahead.
the table that we prepared is based on our best understanding, our current best understanding of the concerns of Cal Trout and also LSL Ranch and ID1. So, but most particularly, we were trying to address the concerns of Cal Trout. So what they've communicated to us in the past was there are certain months out of the year where they would like to see reduced pumping, because those are the most critical months for the migration of the fish in the river. And so we've attempted to do that. But not only have they been concerned about the instantaneous pumping rate, they were also, or I should say, not only were they concerned about the amount of acre feet pumped per month, they've also expressed concern about the instantaneous pumping rate. And so, so we've attempted to adjust that also, and to limit ourselves in that regard on the instantaneous pumping rate. So what I'm trying to convey is that the table was prepared in an attempt to resolve their concerns and have them withdraw their protests. But I'm not naive enough to think that they're going to do that, because when we worked for 2 full years, myself heavily involved, Solvang repeatedly made concessions, and every time they asked us to make concessions, we agreed to most of what they asked for, and we reduced how much we would take and how much we would pump, and imposed all these restrictions on ourselves, until finally, after doing that 3 times, the 4th time, they requested all of this monitoring and studying and all the stuff that would add tremendous costs to the project and actually make it completely unfeasible. There would be a huge negative benefit cost ratio. I mean, the amount of cost would be so great, and the amount of water we would get from the river wells would be so little, it would make the project completely unfeasible. So that's what led, after 2 full years of trying to negotiate and work with them, of us terminating our negotiations with them. And then from then on, we had been working and making progress in settlement with LSL Ranch and ID1. But but that table is our best attempt based on our best understanding to satisfy their concerns. So we've dramatically dropped our total request, and we've reduced the total in those critical months and reduced the instantaneous pumping rate in those critical months. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. Is it, I want to make sure I have it right. Is it Vander Linden? Did I get that right?
Yes, Vander.
All right. All right. Thank you, Mr. Vander Linden. And,
Mr. Liddy,
you know,
can I add one other thing to what
okay, go ahead, Mr. Woolray.
So we're, as staff, we believe that our staff with our abilities to implement with the city staff can meet the limitations that we have provided. And I think that that practical issue is a very important one for Mr. Vander Linden and I to explain this to the city council on Monday.
All right. Well, and thank you. And don't worry, Ms. Hall, I'm going to let you respond too. They've said a lot of things about you, and I'm not going to just leave that unresponded if you want to say anything, but just a minute. Let me just tell you, I mean, there are different ways that matters like this can go forward. I mean, obviously, from the hearing, I guess, I mean, I don't mind doing hearings and issuing proposed orders. That's what we're here for. But obviously, as decision makers, we like settlements when they happen. And if the parties can reach a settlement, that's great. But if they can't, I'll just say, that's what hearings are for. And certainly, if Solvang wants to make those amendments to the petition, and then we go forward to the hearing, we'll have a hearing with that being the proposed project. The analyses that will be necessary will be done on that. And of course, CalTrout and other parties may respond, and we can go forward. That is another way to go forward. And it looks like, or it sounds like that may make sense here with the city, what we'll say, having amended its petition to make what it thinks is a reasonable proposal, and it may present that. And of course, CalTrout and other parties then may respond. So that's looking good. With the city council set to meet, I'm just writing next Monday is September 28th. So we'll talk about a potential reporting deadline for Solvang sometime after the 28th. And Ms. Hall, I don't really want to get into hearing about settlement discussions because I know that their parties make a lot of comments back and forth, and that's what settlement discussions should do. And sometimes they can get fairly heated and all that. And as far as I'm concerned, the bottom line is the city is saying it has made some changes to its, or it's going to, if with city council approval, will be making some changes to its petition, and thinks that those will address some of CalTrout's concerns, but obviously CalTrout has not signed a protest dismissal agreement. So that's fine. And we can certainly go forward with a hearing. And I have no idea how we will address the hearing issues, having not seen the evidence or anything. But since there were quite a few accusations made about CalTrout, I would like to just give you a chance to respond if you want to. And again, please, I don't really need to hear all the details of what happened or didn't happen during settlement, but if you want to say something, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. I appreciate the opportunity. In terms of the previous settlement correspondence, you're absolutely right. There were a handful of back and forth meetings and demand letters, and we consulted with a hydrologist and biologist. And we did make some progress as reflected to the board in our final reporting out of that process. However, my understanding is that at this point, it's a different proposal. We're looking at a different reach of diversion, potentially a different number of wells, a different amount of water, different location of habitat that could be affected. So as far as I'm concerned, we're sort of back to the drawing board in terms of what is this project and how does it impact public trust resources. So while the previous settlement correspondence, ultimately fell apart, or the negotiations ultimately fell apart, I do think there were some points on which we had agreed, like coming up with a well operations plan that we could certainly revisit, and CalTrout's absolutely open to coming up with restrictions that would satisfy their concerns about steelhead. But just to give a sense of the timing, we were engaged in that negotiation process with respect to the previous proposal. And now, since this has returned since the beginning of working together through this current process, we've been requesting more information just so that we can understand and consult with biologists regarding the impacts to steelhead. So during the mandatory settlement conference, we reached out to Solvang several times to try to set up some phone calls. Ultimately, we were able to set something up. We also coordinated with CDFW and NIMS, which is another important point. It's not just Cal Trout. Obviously, we have state and federal expert wildlife agencies that are concerned about impacts on public trust resources, not just steelhead, including riparian habitat. So it's certainly not a matter of, Cal Trout just being endlessly unsatisfied. We would love to see a proposal that addresses impacts on surface flows and steelhead.
Okay, go ahead. Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem. So just in terms of where we left off on the timing, we had our one settlement conversation in which we had asked a handful of questions, and the city had indicated that they were considering a pumping chart with monthly restrictions, and we requested to see a copy of that. So then the first time we saw that was in the submittal to the board on September 18th, I believe, when they submitted their status report. So we just haven't had a time to reconvene since that period to work with the biologist and the other wildlife agencies to determine if we think that pumping chart alone would satisfy all of our concerns. We're of course happy to use that as a jumping off point. And if we have, I'd love to hear, especially from NIMS, Darren Brumbach, and then and CDFW about their concerns about what the flow restrictions might mean on habitat. But there were also a handful of other questions we had that we'd still like the answer to before we feel like we can fully understand the impacts of the proposal.
Okay, well, thank you for that report, and that certainly makes a lot of sense. And I certainly was never suggesting that Cal Trout was going alone. I mean, I think your status conference statements, yours and Cal Fish and Wildlife's and NIMS's, make it clear that all three of you have, all three parties have, I'll just say, concerns about public trust resources, and that you've been coordinating well together, which is good. So if I suggested otherwise, I did not intend to.
I was responding to the city's characterization of Cal Trout as just dragging this along. But
yeah, and you're all very competent, qualified, experienced, and professional attorneys, and I know things sometimes a little tense when there's back and forth. I get that, but I don't really, it's not going to be helpful today for, talk about, saying who did what well or didn't do what well and so forth. That just sort of gets people more and more energized and doesn't really help us move forward. But I certainly understand that there are challenges. I mean, this is a complicated system with a lot of different issues. So the fact that it's taken so long to make progress is not surprising. But anyway, from Ms. Hall, from what you're saying, it sounds like that if the city actually does formally amend its pending change petition to incorporate the proposed pumping limits, instantaneous and monthly, they're in the table in Mr. Woolbrandt's September 18 letter, that then at least you won't have what I'll call the problem of a moving target. At least then the proposed project should be somewhat more firmed up for purposes of analysis and potentially settlement discussions. Is that a fair characterization of what you just said? Of part of what you just said?
Yeah, I think there's a handful of other questions we have about, like, the location of the wells, which we don't actually know. And then I don't think there's been a firm commitment to even a number of wells. I believe their letter states 1 to 2, so we would like to see that formalized. The pumping plan is an essential part. There's still the open question about what would happen with the existing wells. Would they continue to be pumped, and at what rate, or abandoned? We'd like to know if there is any monitoring that would go into effect to assess the impacts of pumping of the new wells on surface flows. If there are significant impacts, is there any kind of adaptive management to respond to those impacts over the course of the project?
Okay, and I'm not holding you to this. I'm not saying this is it, if that's all you say now. We're pretty much brainstorming right now, but that is helpful, and I appreciate you letting me know. So,
Mr. Lilly, I'm sorry.
It's good. Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm just trying to get enough information here so I can figure out an appropriate way to go forward. But Mr. Wolbrandt, please go ahead.
Sure. Just trying to be helpful to your efforts and your process, and I appreciate them. Mr. Van der Linden has told me that another item we will take to the council for its confirmation is a limitation to 2 additional or new wells in our proposed reach area, which is a significant reduction from the 6 wells that were proposed and that were analyzed in the prior EIR. So again, if hopefully that would also be helpful in getting a stable project description.
Yes, well, thank you, Mr. Wolbrandt. And frankly, I think it's helpful for you to hear Ms. Hall's comments. I mean, obviously, you're not going to just agree with everything, and I'm not asking for that. But to hear Caltrout's concerns, the more of those the city can address with its proposed project amendments, or excuse me, its amendments to the proposed project, it'll help facilitate the process. It narrows issues for hearing if we need a hearing, and frankly, it should facilitate settlement as well. So I'm not asking you to agree with anything Ms. Hall said today, but I'm glad you're listening, and I know you are. And I mean, she has stated, I'll just say, valid concerns, and to the extent the city can address those, that's fine. And if not, those obviously can be left over as hearing issues. So I mean, we're sort of jumping around a little bit, and that's fine. But before I go forward, this is probably a good time just to hear from the other parties. And we don't need to repeat anything. I think Ms. Hall has, first of all, Mr. Wolbrandt has said pretty clearly what he and Mr. Van der Linden are going to present to the city council. And if the city council approves it, what will be in the amendments to the petition. I think Ms. Hall has stated some, I'll just say, significant concerns that potentially could be settlement issues for settlement discussions or for hearing if necessary. So with that, I'm just going to go to the other parties and ask, with that sort of rough framework, whether there's anything we've missed. Are there any other issues that we should consider going forward? And of course, today we're not resolving any issues today. I'm just trying to get a scope on issues for potential hearing. So I'll start with you, Ms. Murray, since you're right next to Ms. Hall on the video here. Do you have any additional comments for CDFW?
Yes, and as more fully discussed in our conference statement, there are some issues with this interaction between surface water and groundwater, and would want to know that interaction. If they're going to drill, good to know 2 wells, where they're going to drill them and how deep, and how they're going to monitor the surface flow. If there is an amount that needs to be bypassed, where are they going to propose to measure that? And we would like to see the well driller reports for the new wells and the proposal for those wells. And again, there's just a lot of additional information. The chart was very simple and somewhat helpful, but there's a lot more information that would need to be developed to make that understandable in the real world, as what we're hearing from our biologists.
And yeah, I certainly get that. On the other hand, the numbers do show some significant reductions in the proposed maximum diversion rate. So we'll look at that as, I won't say a step forward, but it's perhaps a step toward refining the issues. But I certainly understand your comments, which frankly echo Ms. Hall's, that they're
right. And lastly, I will say that the chart is a huge increase in what they're currently diverting and what the Water Board investigation in 1999 revealed. So we have some questions about the total amount that that issue wasn't brought up previously. So I think that's the last one I wanted. And again, that's in our status conference statement.
Okay, yes, I saw that, and thank you. And I am going to get, the next topic on my list here is to talk about hydrological modeling, and that gets into different scenarios. And of course, one of them is current conditions and one is proposed projects. So we will circle back to that, but thank you for reminding us of that. So we'll go forward. Ms. Buell for National Marine Fisheries. Is there anything you would like to add to this discussion right now?
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. I don't have anything additional to add besides what is stated in our statement, and then agreeing with the points raised by CalTrout and CDFW. And I would, of course, invite Mr. Brumback to add any comments if he would wish to. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Brumback, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lilly. And I'll echo what Ms. Bill said, that yes, we're in agreement with all that was stated by Ms. Hall and CDFW. I will add, and I would also like to thank the city for this chart that was provided. It's sort of I view it as a summary, and therefore one specific request, if you will, or recommendation to inform moving this forward, as well as the potential impacts on surface flow, is we're depicting a maximum diversion rate and total amount. The question still lies as far as, the number of total wells, which I'm hearing, I believe, is 3 total, 2 new and at least 1 existing. But overall, how the location of those wells, therefore the distribution and the incremental pumping at those locations, as well as the cumulative, and overall how that does or does not impact surface flow in the river.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brumback. And I noticed that was raised in the National Marine Fisheries Status Conference statement. I'll just say this is a fairly typical issue with water projects and water right hearings. And I'm probably going to garble this a little bit, but I'll try to get it right. And that is the level of specificity in the proposed project and what is versus what is modeled. I assume for the new modeling, the city will have to, assume some specific locations for wells, but at least right now, the city's petition just says the wells would be somewhere in this reach and does not have a specific location. And I understand why the city wants to do that, because you could drill a well at one spot and it turns out to be dry and you need to move over to get one that has a better yield. But on the other hand, I also understand the concerns that CalTrout, CDFW, and NIMS have stated that if they don't know the locations of the wells, and if they deviate from what is modeled, there could be issues that haven't been properly modeled and analyzed. So I'll just note that there's a tension there. There are concerns on both, I'll just say from both points of view, but that's something that the city and the other parties will have to address going forward. And ultimately, if there's a hearing that we will have to address. But this is not the first time that tension has come up in connection with a water project. So I just note that. I certainly was noticing that yesterday when I was reading over the statements, and that's something that we will have to work through. So with that, let me just go quickly down the list of other parties. I want to make sure I haven't missed anybody. For improvement district number 1, is there anything else that anybody would like to add? Is that Ms. Diaz? Are you for improvement district number 1?
No,
No.
I am. This is Gary Kvistad for ID1.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Diaz, you're for Alisal. So Mr. Kvistad, please go ahead for ID1. I'm sorry if my notes are a little garbled here. I apologize.
That's quite fine. Yeah, I think there's a few other comments. We understand we've had a conversation with the city earlier this month, and we talked about the chart that the city attached to their letter. There was some additional information that we are still expecting from Solvang regarding more definition on the project that's really important both to ID1 and I believe also to Alisol, and that is more detail on pumping rates and so forth above the Alisol Bridge. We have not seen that yet, but are expecting it from the city. They had indicated they were going to provide that detail to us. The other thing that's really important is while the chart provides some level of detail, it doesn't provide detail with respect to tying those diversions to flows in the river. And we think that is extremely important, that those pumping rates may be fine at certain times, may not be fine at other things. And so more definition in regard to flows and subsurface water levels, I think, is really important to include and provide a more stable and complete project description that we can analyze. And so I would encourage the city to continue to provide more detail, as some of the other parties has indicated, so that we can thoroughly understand and analyze what they're proposing and hopefully find some common ground to reach a resolution with the city. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the comment. So Ms. Diaz, I apologize for getting the wrong client for you a minute ago, but do you have anything more to say for Alisal Guest Ranch?
No problem at all, Mr. Lilly, and nothing further to add. Our position is expressed in our joint statement and consistent with improvement district number 1.
Okay, and also I do appreciate the joint statement. It just reduces the number we have to read. I know you're in the same law firm, but I'm still glad you can coordinate with each other. It makes it easier for me, probably for you too. Okay, so anything from the parent district, St. Inez River Water Conservation District, any additional comments?
Hi, Mr. Lilly. This is Brett Stroud for the parent district. At this point in the process, we still need to hear what falls out of this process. So the parent district's concern in this proceeding primarily relates to the modeling and environmental review that will be done. We want to make sure that whatever is done is consistent with Order 2019-148. So it sounds like we're still working on actually having a concrete proposal. And I know you said you wanted to discuss modeling as well. That's something that we're interested in talking about. But other than that, I think at this point, we're waiting for more details.
Okay, thank you. And I for some reason, we missed you before, Mr. Stroud, but I'll ask my staff to change Young Wooldridge to read Brett Stroud in our list of participants. It will help us with our recording.
Yes, I apologize with that. I've had some technical difficulties with Zoom lately.
I think we're all still learning. I think we're all getting better, but we're all still learning. So that's certainly no problem at all. And as I say, hopefully we'll have our act together before the hearing comes, because at that point, it really is good to be able to have the video, both to see the witnesses and also to post exhibits. But for today, the audio is fine. Okay, I think I've covered everyone for this round, and certainly we'll circle back. So I'll just say, Mr. Wolbrandt, I know you've heard an earful, and you're dealing with a lot of parties here, which is typical for a water project. But the more of these issues you can address in your formal amendments to the city of Solvang's pending petition, the better. I mean, it just means there are less issues to try to resolve down the road with either settlement discussions or hearing. But on the other hand, I fully understand. I'll say it's probably impossible for you to be able to resolve all of these issues with the amendment that you file. So I think you need to do it as well as you can, address what you can, be as specific as you can in the amendment, but then you'll file it and then we'll move forward. And the unresolved, what we'll call unresolved issues, those are hearing issues, and that's what hearings are for. And we'll hear testimony on those, evidence and testimony, and we'll prepare a proposed order. So with that, let me just move. Oh, sorry, Mr. Wolbrandt, I'll just come back to you. Are there any other follow-up comments on that? You don't have to, but is there anything else you'd like to say now on that point of refinement of the project description in the amended petition?
So Mr. Vanderlinden is handing me a sheet of paper. We can provide information on our anticipated distribution of wells, and we can provide anticipated information on what we expect the pumping to be from each well. I think in the future, CDFW asked for drilling logs. Those, of course, those kinds of things and that level of information is stuff that can only happen after the wells are drilled, and to a certain extent, what our pumping rates are going to be. We can come up with maximums, but we will need to actually try and drill wells first. So there's a lot of chicken and the egg to this. The other thing, I did want to thank Ms. Hall for our opportunities to have further discussions. And we really would like as much information as we can get back from the fishery interest agencies. We've picked a reach where we understood it was an area that had, comparatively to the rest of the river, lower habitat concerns. And so again, to the extent that we can hear if there are habitat concerns in that area B on our map that we don't know about, haven't thought about, that'll help us to be more specific. So I look forward to that back and forth exchange of information. Thank you.
Okay, good. And I'm glad you're all talking, at least some. I know you have over the years, and obviously I encourage you to continue to do that. So it does sound like if the city files a formal amendment to the petition with at least the refinements and level of details it can, that will help narrow the discussion. And then obviously to continue to have those discussions with the other parties will be very valuable. So Mr. Wobrant, what is a reasonable schedule or reasonable deadline for me to specify in our next order regarding when the city would file its formal additional amendments to the change petition beyond those in the August 7 letter?
So we can provide you within 2 weeks the changes that we've discussed today. I would sort of throw a question to you, which is, if there is additional information in particular coming from the Fishery Resource Agency about that area B, that's not something that we have gotten. Actually, let me withdraw that. We can respond in 2 weeks, and my hope is that our amended petition then will be reviewed by all of the parties, and they will continue to provide us that feedback information.
I think that's probably the best way to do it, Mr. Wobrant. So thank you. I'm afraid the back and forth otherwise might take a long time. I'd rather get the amended petition on file, and then you can have the back and forth, and should. But let's do that, and that makes sense. And I certainly appreciate everybody's willingness to continue to talk on that. All right, so I will target September 28th was the city council meeting. 2 weeks after that would be October 12th. So is that a reasonable deadline, Mr. Wobrant?
Mr. Lilly, I have Mr. Vanderlinden's commitment to work with me, and we will meet that deadline.
Okay, you're fading in and out, but check with Mr. Vanderlinden and tell me whether October 12th is the date or whether you want a little more time.
October 12th works.
Okay, good, and that will be very helpful. All right, so let me go forward to my next issue, and that is modeling, hydrologic modeling. And I will say I reviewed, it's been a few months, so don't hold me to all the details, but Stetson engineers did very detailed hydrological modeling of the city's prior proposed project. And that modeling is discussed in their detailed tech memos discussing the results of the modeling, and then it's used for the analysis of environmental impacts in Solvang's 2012 EIR. Now, obviously, we're talking about we have a different baseline because we now have the board's order, the 2019-0148 order, which changes the baseline flows that the Bureau of Reclamation provides from Bradbury Dam and Kachuma Reservoir. And we also have a different project, as far as I can tell, a smaller project, lower maximum diversion rates than what were analyzed before. But I think with those two, those are both pretty major changes. I think that I just don't see how the hearing can go forward without updated hydrological modeling. And frankly, I think any settlement discussions would be greatly informed by modeling of the current project with the current conditions. So first of all, Mr. Wolbrand, I'll ask you if you agree with that, with my assessment that additional modeling is needed.
Mr. Lilly, on behalf of the city, we do not believe that additional standalone modeling of the city's significantly decreased project with increased flow that is meant to protect the city's area of origin rights, amongst other rights, it makes sense. Again, we would be happy and would like to continue to coordinate with what we understand is comprehensive modeling work that is being done in response to Order 2019-0148. I've had those conversations with Mr. Walsh a couple of times, and to the extent that we can make sure we provide him the information they need, the city is committed to providing that information. But we think that that's the proper forum for in-stream flow modeling. And I think that's what we're really talking about here.
So could you just tell, is that being done by engineers at Stetson Engineering?
My understanding is that's the case, but again, Mr. Walsh is here on the call, and I believe that the parent district is coordinating. That may be too strong a word, but is certainly significantly involved in that effort.
Okay, maybe, and incidentally, I'm going to ask my staff to change the name from Kevin W. to Kevin Walsh. It'll just help me remember Mr. Walsh's last name, although I don't think I'll forget. But Mr. Walsh, please tell us what the status and the status plan and schedule is for the additional modeling that I guess the parent district is conducting in cooperation with the Bureau of Reclamation.
Yeah, Kevin Walsh here. Thank you, Mr. Lilly. It is in cooperation with the Bureau, as well as some of the other interested parties. Some are on this phone call in the Water Rights Order 2019-0148. And it's a Bureau-driven schedule and a state board-driven schedule. Some of the work can't not be done until we experience, I'm speaking in general here, maybe not totally specific to this project because there's more than one modeling focus, but some of the work cannot be done until we experience a series of wet and dry years, and there's no predicting on when that might happen. It might be started now, or we're in for a series of very similar years for a while. It's the coordination might be a little strong of a word. It's more of a joint effort with Bureau and their beneficiaries of the project. Us as representing the parent district is representing the downstream interests at this point in time. And then, of course, others have an interest in reviewing this work. So I wish I could give you a schedule. for that work. It there just isn't one now. What the state board did set as a schedule is they wanted a plan or an outline, if you will, of what this work will entail and how it will be executed. And implied in that, I suppose, is the best sort of a schedule that might be arrived at. And that work is under review right now. And in fact, NIMS and California Department of Fish and Wildlife have reviewed some of that effort that is specified in Water Rights Order 2019-0148 with regards to the studies, including hydrologic studies that were ordered by the state board this past year.
Okay, when you say ordered by the state board, is that in the order 29-0148, or is there some supplemental order from the state board?
Yeah, yes, I'm sorry, I'm referring to -0148.
Okay, and I certainly have that in my file. I know that there were a lot of studies ordered and so forth.
True.
All right, well,
it's the term, it's the part of the order that's called terms. There's a list of terms in there, and that's where these hydrologic studies and others live in the order.
Okay, I can look. Do you happen to have a term number, or if not, I can just look at it.
So someone on this call have a term number for those hydrologic? I don't have it right at my fingertips.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Broombeck, do you have a term number?
Yes, Mr. Lilly. I would refer to term 18 plan, and I believe it's term 20 planning, which involves a number of individual plans, including, I believe, the modeling under term 24.
Okay. Okay, well, I guess I should have known that this would be what I would hear. It's not what I want to hear. I mean, I certainly am not criticizing what the board has done in the order. That you know, all undoubtedly is appropriate in connection with the Kachuma project, but this really puts me in a quandary, and I don't know how to address it. So I'm going to ask all of you how you think we should address it. I mean, I know full well from what you've described, we're talking years of modeling work. I mean, you know, Mr. Walsh basically said, if we have to experience a series of wet and dry years, that just by definition is many years. Even if they come right in the order we want, it still is several years. And then the technical analysis and so forth. And I mean, it's very complicated, and it's just going to take many years. And I don't really want to delay our processing of the city of Solvang's petition for many years. Now, what we have in the record is the Stetson modeling that was done in 2012, or done for the 2012 EIR. I think it was done a year or two before that. As Mr. Wolbrandt has correctly pointed out, that was for greater diversions than what we're talking about now. Although there may be some question as to the locations of those diversions. I forget, I think the focus there, at least for one of the scenarios, was to have the new wells be downstream of the Alisal Bridge. But it certainly was not the project that we're going to get the amendment to the petition for by October 12th. And I just don't know whether or not that modeling will be sufficient for our hearing, if we have a hearing. So, but on the other hand, I really don't want to wait for a few years, particularly for a few years for modeling that's not even for this project. There could have to be additional add-on modeling or something for this project. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Wolbrandt. It looks like Mr. Vanderlinden may want to say something. How do you think I should address this problem? I hope I'm making clear what the problem is. How do you think we should address it?
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. So the way I see this, Solvang has built a foundation for a 5-story apartment building. And now, which everybody objected to. So now we're proposing to build a 2-story apartment building, and that foundation will be the same. The foundation is clearly stout enough. If it's stout enough to withhold and support a 5-story apartment building, you can certainly support and hold the 2-story apartment building. So Solvang is one of the smallest pumpers along the San Ynez River. This water is for the survival of Solvang, for this future of Solvang. And I've been here 10 years. There's been 10 years of attorneys arguing back and forth, making lots of money. All the while, the burden, only 2 people on this phone call, myself and Pedro Garcia, are responsible for actually providing water to make sure that when you go home and turn your faucet on, water comes out. That's a huge burden. And that's all Solvang's trying to do. We're trying to just get a little bit more water for the future of Solvang, for the future survival and economic viability of the city. So I think tons of modeling has been done, and our project is greatly reduced. Myself, this process was going on for many years before I got here. This has been going on, I think, for over 15 years now. I think it needs to come to a close. I think, Mr. Lilly, you need to get all the information you can and make your best determination. And but I will also say that we will add additional information to our map to show where, or to show the distribution of these proposed 2 additional future river wells. We will also update that table to provide information on the maximum pumping from each well. And we'll show the distribution and separation of the wells. So I think that addresses some of the concerns I'm hearing raised today. And then we can also, I think it's kind of irrelevant, but we can also provide the maximum depth of our proposed future wells. So, and that addresses at least one comment that someone just made. So
I think actually on that one, Mr. Vanderlyn, now this is a lawyer doing geology, so beware, it's dangerous. But I think the concern actually is that will there be screenings in the shallower levels, because those potentially could have more effect on surface flows. I don't think the concern is that the well may be really deep. I think it's that it may pump water from shallower aquifers. So I just throw that out for you to.
Well, let me just provide you some information that might be helpful. So the 2 existing wells that the city has along the banks of the San Ynez River are well 3 and well 7A. And those wells are approximately 55 feet deep. So that's when they hit bedrock. So right now, Solvang sits kind of in the worst, shallowest, my understanding is it's kind of the worst, shallowest alluvial section of the river. So my understanding is in some areas that alluvium under the river goes deeper, but so I'm imagining, there may be some deeper wells, but the bottom line I'm trying to convey to you, Mr. Lilly, is our wells are very shallow, and that information is clearly depicted and explained in our EIR, and it's and shallow wells or depth wells of shallow depth were what were anticipated in all of our analysis and previous modeling that was done actually before I ever got here. So I've been here 10 years and all that stuff. So this thing's just been going on so long, and the city's just bleeding money out. I've explained before, the city spent $80 million to export or to import state water to try to reduce our reliance on river water and groundwater basin. And now we've got the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and potential, ramifications of that. So, yeah, myself, just after 10 years, I would really just like to see this resolved and the city to be able to move forward. And, I know you don't know me, but I honestly have tried to make an effort to try to propose a project that would have the least environmental impact and be acceptable to Cal Trout, National Marine Fisheries, and I hadn't heard from California Department of Fish and Wildlife before. They just are new to this, but that's what I've tried to do in working with the city's legal counsel up to now, and yeah. So I just, to me, this whole thing is just really crazy. When I talk about this, just give overview to the average person, whether they live in Solvang or San Ynez Valley, they just think it's madness. It's complete madness. I'm sorry. It's just,
Well, I guess if it makes you feel any better, I'll just say that's typical for California and water projects. And I understand everything you're saying and the importance of the water supply to the city. But on the other hand, this is an important river for a listed fish species, and those considerations also need to factor in. And I'm not saying you've ignored them, far from it, but I just, there are important considerations that all parties are putting forward here, and that's what we have to try to work through.
Well, from my perspective, I would respectfully request that you proceed as you were planning on with this parallel track and move this forward. And, we'll do our best to try to provide the additional information and try to satisfy the natural resources concerns and so forth. And we'll modify our map and modify our table and, but I think personally, I think you should just, move this forward and make a final decision and let's move on.
All right. Well, and just to clarify, thank you, Mr. Van der Linden. And just to clarify, my office doesn't make final decisions. All we do is prepare proposed orders that go to the full water board for consideration. But that's a legal technicality here. So I'll just say I don't want to just put an indefinite hold on this project pending the modeling work by the Bureau of Reclamation and others, because it's pretty darn clear to me that would be a hold for a minimum of several years and probably more. And I do think this, I don't know if the city is entitled to the order it wants, but the city is entitled to a hearing. And I think, and that certainly is the direction I've received from the board members who supervise me, is that they want to move projects like this forward or move hearings like this forward. So that, I think, is what we'll do. So, Mr. Wolbrand, I'm going to jump ahead to the next thing on my notes before I circle back for comments from the other attorneys. I'm hearing pretty clearly from Mr. Van der Linden and also from you that you do not think the city needs to update the Stetson hydrological modeling work that was done for the 2012 EIR. And I don't know how that's going to play out. I think the city has a right to go forward to a hearing and to present evidence based on the old modeling. But of course, other parties have a right to argue that modeling is not sufficient. And then my staff and I will have to grapple with that issue, assuming you haven't reached a settlement, and figure out how to address it. I mean, it is competent, admissible evidence, but whether or not it's sufficient to form the basis of a decision, I don't know. And I can't know until we have the hearing. But let me ask you one other question, and that concerns CEQA. And of course, the water board, if it issues an order with any approval of the petition, of the amended petition, has to comply with CEQA. And the water board will be a responsible agency under CEQA, since the city of Solvang, as lead agency, has prepared an EIR. It seems to me at the very least, the city needs to prepare an addendum to the 2012 EIR that describes the new project and describes why the factors in the CEQA guidelines, I think it's 15163 or 162 or 3 of the CEQA guidelines, but I may not be right on the number, don't require a supplemental EIR here. So, and the reason I want to ask you this before I circle back to the other parties is that document may go a long way towards setting out the city's analysis of the environmental impacts of the new project, the new proposed project with the amended petition, and may give the other parties something that they can focus on for their review. So, long way of saying, leading up to my question, how does the city plan to comply with CEQA in connection with the amended petition for this process?
Mr. Lilly, I think that you have
And just get a little closer to the microphone so we can hear you. Sorry, your voice activated, and I want to make sure I can hear you.
I think you've accurately described what the city would intend to do, and we're trying to get the most information we can get on the most stable amended project we can get in order to do that updated analysis. And I'm hoping, again, we can get clarification on what remaining impacts, in particular the resource agencies, think still exist from what we had thought was a fairly clear and reduced area of potential well drilling. So as Matt has said, we'll provide, to the extent we can, more detail about that. And once we know what I'm going to say stable project is, and you all agree that that is the stable project, we would update that environmental document.
Okay. What do you think is a reasonable schedule for that?
Well, I'd like to do that, Matt, within the next 6 months. I'm back to in many ways, this chicken and egg thing. We certainly, I listened to all of the discussion about hydrologic modeling, and with all respect, I think that we may be in the circumstance of talking about hydrologic modeling because everyone talks about hydrologic modeling. I don't see how we could, without knowing the information that is going to come from the updated 2019-0148 hydrologic modeling, really meaningfully change the hydrologic modeling that was already done in this instance. Again, what we know is there was hydrologic modeling done that assumed a different, or at least slightly different, release regime. So now there is greater water being released, and the city has significantly reduced its overall proposed pumping, has significantly, or we are expecting will be significantly reducing and limiting by time instantaneous pumping, and has reduced the number of potential wells from the 6 that were analyzed in the prior environmental document and the prior modeling to no more than 2 new wells. And again, it was 6 new wells, and to a smaller reach further downstream, and so further away from the Alisal Bridge and the reach of concern. So I'm expecting that the update is that all potential impacts are going to be less than those previously analyzed.
Okay. Well, and of course, we're not going to prejudge that, but that certainly, I understand where you're coming from. So I'm going to just throw this out. And again, I'm brainstorming, so please all bear with me. But I want to make sure you all hear what my thoughts are, and then we can decide how to go forward. Or I can decide how to go forward. I think that I need to have the city prepare and approve the addendum to the, I'm going to call it an addendum. I realize the city hasn't made a final decision on that, but from everything Mr. Wolbrandt, you've said, if there are no new significant impacts, then potentially an addendum is possible. The question is whether there's new information that would require an EIR, and I don't know the answer to that. But assuming the city can do an addendum, and of course, the more input you get from the other parties, the better, and the more you can address that, the better. But assuming you can do that, of course, 6 months sounds like a long time to me, but I understand it's a fairly complex technical process. But I do want to have the city approve that addendum before we start our hearing. Some of you may have seen what happened with the State Water Board and the Cal Water Fix proceeding a couple of years ago, and I'm certainly not pointing fingers at anybody, but I think I'll just say as an observer from the outside, and I wasn't heavily involved in the hearing, I think there was a real problem with the EIR changing as the hearing was going forward, and the project description perhaps changing and the analysis changing. So I want to avoid those problems if we possibly can. And frankly, the new CEQA document has to be done before the Water Board can issue an order on these petitions anyway. So my thought, unless any of you tell me otherwise, and I know Mr. Wolbrandt, you and Mr. Vanderland said the city wants to move forward with this, but my thought is we cannot move forward until the city has done that CEQA document. So let me just first ask you two questions. Do you agree with that? And if so, can you refine your schedule for the city completing the CEQA document?
Mr. Lilly, I do agree. And unfortunately, when you asked me to revise my timeline, I remember being in a hearing in mid-March when we were told that the shutdowns for COVID were only going to be 2 weeks. That's now 6 months ago. So 6 months really is not a very long time, particularly, again, if we're going to have the same communication challenges we've had in the last 6 months. The city also has 3 and potentially 4 of its 5 city council members that will be changed in the election in November. And the city has not had a comprehensive update to its general plan since the city incorporated. So we have embarked on the first comprehensive update to the city's general plan, which of course also will involve an EIR. If I had all my, as the lawyer, as opposed to Matt, who has to provide water to the tap, if I had all my druthers, the 2 environmental documents would be coordinated with 1 preparer. And I expect that's going to take more than a year. My thought on being able to do a standalone addendum in 6 months, again, I'm including in that the fact that there's an election in November. I have no idea what the outcome will be. And then my experience of 30-something years with government is that not a lot happens in November and December, even if you're trying to push it to happen in those 2 months. So I would suggest, and I can give more thought and discussion with our staff on this, but I would suggest that 6-month timeline is pushing it as hard as we can, and we'll continue to do that.
Okay. Again, I understand what you're saying. Unfortunately, a lot of what you said is true, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but I mean, unfortunate from the perspective of wanting to move this hearing along, and that's my only concern. But I understand what you're saying. I do hope you and everyone else understands why I'm saying what I am about the CEQA update. And again, from my point of view, my number one goal is to get this hearing going. Certainly a standalone document is going to be a lot faster than if this gets morphed into a general plan amendment update. Because I mean, if that's supposed to take a year, it'll probably end up taking more because frankly, it's going to have a lot of issues that are way beyond anything that this hearing will be involved in, just land use type issues. So I'm going to take that for what you said, Mr. Wolbrandt, that with the city working very hard, it might be able to do an update within 6 months. And of course, I did just hear Mr. Vanderlyn say the city wants to get this thing moving forward. So to some extent, it's in the city's interest to do this in 6 months more than anybody else's. But I will consider that in the scheduling order that I send out. So with that, we've covered modeling and CEQA, and I'd like to hear the other parties' comments on this. And I've certainly expressed my concerns about moving forward and not having this be bogged down for several years. So who would like to go first to respond to the comments that I've made and that Mr. Wolbrandt and Mr. Vanderlyn have made regarding modeling and CEQA? I'm glad to, whoever wants to go first, just speak up and we'll do it that way.
Mr. Lilly, this is Darren Brumback with No Fisheries.
Please go ahead, Mr. Brumback.
Yeah, I'd like to address several of those items. And regarding CEQA, I will leave that to the CEQA experts that are on the line. But in regard to modeling or analyses to assess potential impacts on surface flow and consequentially fish and fish habitat, there was a lot of discussion in regard to Order 2019-0148 and reflecting on certain studies that are required in that order. And particularly, I was hearing the expectation of additional water there as measured at Alisal Bridge. And that's true. And in some cases, a substantial increase in flows relative to current operations at Bradbury Dam. However, a rough estimate on my recent review, those increased flows subject to the water order are likely to occur in perhaps 40% of years. And those other 60% remaining years, there is no flow target at Alisal Bridge. And instead, it refers back to proposed operations from Bureau of Reclamation dating back to 2000 and then often associated with the NIMS 2000 biological opinion. To complicate things further, that opinion, well, I'd say the project in general, Kachuma project is required reinitiated consultation, which will result in a new biological opinion and perhaps different flow targets or requirements at Alisal Bridge in addition to Water Order 2019-0148. So it does complicate it to that degree, but I'd say just under the current water order, those increased flows are perhaps relatively less frequent than presumed here. So I would suggest that all parties, and particularly the city, consider that in informing going forward with the assessment. Also, I heard reference to only the new wells as far as potential impacts. We're looking at this, I should say National Marine Fisheries Service is looking at it in terms of the city's operations under its permit for diversions, which would include also operations of the existing wells. So I think it's important, if not critical, that the assessment also include the location and incremental rates at those wells in addition or as part of this assessment. And early in the conversation, I believe Mr. Wolbrandt had a specific question for me, and I'm trying to read between the lines, and I think it might also inform that assessment. And so if I may, Mr. Lilly, ask Mr. Wolbrandt what his question was.
It's probably best if I sort of control this. And we're not in a hearing now, but I don't want to lose control of the process. So Mr. Wolbrandt, was there some specific question you had for Mr. Brumback? And again, this is not a hearing and we're not resolving anything other than scheduling today. But did you have a specific, considering that, do you have a specific question for Mr. Brumback?
Mr. Lilly, I don't want to extend this overly long. We had a conference call, I think it was 2 weeks ago. Mr. Brumback wasn't able to participate on that. I believe it was Ms. Beal who mentioned that Mr. Brumback probably had some relevant comments about what we're calling Area B and potential, either potential fishery concerns or the lack of potential fishery concerns in detail. And so I'm hoping that we can have a follow-up to this and to the extent that Mr. Brumback can give us that additional information, and also that he can give us feedback on our pumping limits, and in particular, if we got the months right, and if there are other or different months or months in particular types of years that we should inform our proposal based upon, that would be very helpful for us. Thanks.
Okay, so, and please, when we're done, Mr. Wolbrandt, just give Ms. Beal a call and set up a conference call with her and Mr. Brumback and whoever else you want and have those discussions. I don't want to be involved in them. They may involve settlement, they may not, but please, if they can help you refine your project in a way that works for the city and is better for National Marine Fisheries and potential other parties, that's way better for you and everyone else going forward. But Mr. Brumback, unless there's anything you want to say, I don't really want to get involved in this. This is really the merits of the petition. I'm just trying to work out a schedule today, but is there anything you want to say about that that's relevant to what I'm talking about today?
No, I fully understand and appreciate that, and look forward to having that discussion with the city to hope assist them in moving forward. If I may, I would like to ask specifically what Area B is, and I'm looking at the map submitted by the city, and I see proposed reach of diversion relative to the original. So I'm just curious, just so I have an understanding and can inform further discussion with the city, what specifically Area B is.
Okay, and I don't want to get into that today. I mean, it sounds like a simple question, but I know better. Nothing's ever simple in this world. So please go ahead, now Mr. Vanderlyn. I really don't want to get into substantive issues today, but if you have to say something, go ahead.
Okay, well, just very briefly, in the former modeling by Stetson Engineering done by the city of Solvang, and in our EIR, they defined two reaches. Reach A, immediately downstream of the LSL bridge, and reach B, further downstream, which in the area that we locally call the Buell Flat area. So it's in reference to the prior modeling and the EIR.
Okay, so please have these discussions. You all need to talk to each other, not me, but with each other. So please, Mr. Brumback, these are good questions. I'm not belittling them, but I don't want to cover them today because I have to get through scheduling. But I really hope you and Ms. Beal can just today or soon get on the call with Mr. Vanderlyn and Mr. Wolbrandt and hammer this stuff out. Spend as long as you need to, but it's in both of your agencies' interests to try to work to reach agreement on these things, and bring in Cal Fish and Wildlife and Cal Trout if appropriate. I mean, I know if you have too many parties, it gets to be hard, but keep talking. Let's see if you can work these things through and make progress, but not right now. So with that, anything else? I'm sorry if I've cut you off, Mr. Brumback, but hopefully I've given you a productive path forward. Is there anything else you'd like to say on the modeling and CEQA issues?
No, thank you very much, Mr. Lilly, and I didn't feel cut off. Very appropriate.
Good. I'm trying to be nice here. I'm trying to be polite. So, Ms. Beal, anything else for National Marine Fisheries on these two issues?
I just more specifically, if Darren had any opinions about modeling, but if not, then I don't have anything further at this time. Thank you.
Okay, I think he's covered that pretty well. Is there anything, Mr. Broomback, you need to add about the modeling issues we've discussed?
I would say not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, I think you all understand the quandary I have, and I think we all have a quandary, but we have different schedules here, some of which involve years, if not decades, some which are shorter. So with that, let's just circle through while we're on the fishery agencies. Ms. Murray, is there anything you'd like to add on these hydrological and modeling and CEQA issues for Cal Fish and Wildlife?
Yes, thank you. Briefly, I mean, it's more detail in our status conference statement. We absolutely think more modeling specific to this new different project needs to be done. And we'll look forward to hopefully, if getting more, somewhat more of the Stetson engineering modeling to be done, not a full, if it's not a full EIR, some additional modeling for this project. I'll wait to see in terms of additional CEQA does need to be done because this project description hasn't been analyzed. And we'll wait and see what form of additional CEQA does take place.
Okay, and again, I heard a willingness from the city of Solvang to have discussions with the other parties, including, of course, CDFW, and I hope they will. 6 months is a challenge, even for a CEQA addendum after a comprehensive EIR, if that's the path the city ends up taking. But obviously, I've heard Mr. Wolbrandt expressed a willingness to have those discussions, and I think, Ms. Murray, what you said makes a lot of sense. It's can Stetson do just some, I'll just say fairly simple adjustments to the prior modeling that are sufficient for the CEQA addendum? Maybe not. I don't know. Or can they do post-processing beyond the prior modeling that will work? And again, I don't know. These are technical issues, but I hope you, and I know Cal Fish and Wildlife has qualified hydrologic experts who can work with you, but I hope you can have those discussions with Mr. Wolbrandt and Mr. Vanderlyn and see. I mean, at the end of the day, I want the best analysis we can have of the impacts of the action that the city is asking the board to take on the fishery resources. So that's my goal, is certainly to get the best analysis we can, considering the time frame and the other limitations we have. So I hope that dialogue can continue. And everybody here has good qualified technical people, so and good lawyers too. So hopefully you can all work together on this.
And we have had hydrogeologists assigned to this project and biologists, so they are eager to engage with additional information from the city.
Yeah, and and frankly, you may agree here's what the impacts would be, and you may or may not agree on whether they're significant. But still, that's progress if you can get the technical analysis done. So I'll just say that, and I appreciate your comments. So I'll shift over to you, Ms. Hall, since we're on the fisheries issues somewhat. Do you have any comments on the modeling and CEQA issues that I've raised and that we've discussed today?
Thanks, Mr. Lilly. I would just agree with CDFW. We certainly want to see more modeling specific to this project. Exactly what that looks like, I share your concerns, is unclear, and we'll wait and see what form the CEQA analysis will take. So far in our statements, we felt it was premature to pin down the specific modeling without a better sense of the project description. So I really like the approach of having a city formally modify the petition and really give us a better sense of the project, and then move forward on these other issues, because I absolutely agree it doesn't make sense to move forward to a hearing without having that information.
Okay. And I think you all understand where I'm coming from. I want to try to distill this down to some issues that we can work with. They're going to be hard enough to analyze, even if we do that. But if we have distilled issues and the best technical evidence, then at least we have something we can work with. All right, so let's go forward with ID number 1. I'm trying to remember, I think that's Mr. Kvidstad for ID number 1.
That's correct, Mr. Lilly.
Thank you. What are your comments here?
I'll just agree with some of the prior comments regarding, I think we need and you've already gone over this, more stable, complete, revised project description. Until we get that description, we really can't determine whether what level of CEQA review is going to be required or what sort of hydrologic studies might be needed. I think that's the revised project description is the initial first step that I think has to be taken before we can determine what else needs to be done. I did have a comment on the process that you laid out a little bit earlier in this call about the Solvang developing that new project description, and I'm saying this from the point of trying to have a complete project description as possible that hopefully most, if not all, the parties can agree on. My suggestion is to have the city prepare their project description that they've outlined earlier in this call. I know there's been several comments about it, but it would be to, after they prepare the revised project description, before they submit it to you for a further amended petition, would be to, for a limited time, circulate that project description to all the parties so that we can weigh in on what we think, if it's complete or if the other things that the city may not have put in or may not even have thought of, and allow the parties to provide comments to that project description over, I don't know, a week or 2 week period. And then at that point, have the city go through their approval process with city council and then submit an amended petition. That the city wouldn't be required to include what comments come from the interested parties and participants, but at least they'd have the benefit of everyone's thinking on the new project description before they approve it at city council and submit a further amended petition. Thank you.
Okay, and just so we're clear, Mr. Kavitsit, I was sort of thinking the same thing about October 12th, maybe too soon. Just to clarify, I don't want to call it a project description because that sort of sounds like CEQA, but what we're talking about is amendments to the change petition. But with that nomenclature clarification, I tend to agree with you that it can't hurt. When the worst that happens is the city circulates it to everyone else and says, here's our draft amendment to the petition. This others submit comments and the city says, no, we're not going to do that, and then files it. But I don't think there's any harm with having that internal discussion with obviously my office not involved. So Mr. Wolbrandt, do you have any comments about that? It may affect your timing of when you go to city council, but it seems like at least trying to have that dialogue could be productive.
So, Mr. Lilly, I think I floated that idea.
Again, voice activated, please get.
I'm sorry, I think I floated that idea about an hour ago, and I think I was talked out of that, including by you. I thought about it some more. I need to keep my city council advised. So we will be taking an item to them on Monday. We will be keeping them advised. I don't see, actually, after having thought about it more, how providing you with a copy of what the council authorizes to me is a bad thing. But if you believe that it is better for me to circulate to this entire group something which then I take back to my city council again, with the input from the group and consider whether we make any of the changes, I'm happy to do that. I just want to also note, though, that the city does not have the significantly large resources to have specialists that some of the other parties here do have available. And you already asked me if I could cut the environmental review and the update time to less than 6 months. So each time we put an iteration of additional process in, each time it means additional cost to the city and additional time. And I will try and bring us all back to the fact that the city made a decision several months ago that the cost of this process is so significant that it would go a different direction and withdraw its request for time extension, significantly reduce its plans for reliance on river wells, and focus on just area B and not area A for those now likely only 2 rather than 6 wells. So I'd like us to be moving forward on a more economic basis. And I think that including you with our report from what I'm authorized by the council on Monday is better and doesn't limit any process discussion. And I would, based upon my experience recently, like to give it to everybody at the same time.
Including me, you mean?
Mr. Lilly, including you.
Okay, so here's what I'll do. I'm going to try to distill this all into the order. I'll leave and I'm sorry if I have given conflicting signals today, Mr. Wolbran. I certainly have tried to avoid that, but I may have, and I apologize if I have. I'm going to go ahead and leave the October 12 deadline for the city to file its revised petition. And it sounds like with the city council meeting next Monday, it's going to be hard, but not impossible. You can still have some dialogue this week before that meeting for, we're talking refinements, not major changes to the petition. But I will leave that deadline, but certainly if, as a result of discussions with the other parties, you think there are adjustments, Mr. Wolbrandt, clarifications, additional elements, or anything to add to the amended petition after October 12th, you certainly can do that. Again, let me just ask this. When would you be able to take it to the city council again after September 28th?
So the council generally meets every 2 weeks. Again, we're going to have the interesting circumstance here that they're going to be likely involved in election campaign time even more than they are right now, and then an election on November the 3rd, and then potentially actually not just potentially, because none of the 3 incumbents are running for their current offices. So we will have a change on the council that occurs I believe it's the first Monday after the first Friday of December. So again, one of the reasons I would like to take something now, get it to you all, including Mr. Lilly, to you, and then be able to get what I expect to be some more formal responses back to that before I take it to the council again.
Okay, so it sounds like the council would meet again on October 12. Is that correct?
I believe that that's correct.
Okay, I'll just do this. I'm going to make the deadline October 19. If you want to submit it before then, that's fine. The deadline is just the last date. If you want to submit it after the September 28 meeting to me and other parties, that's fine. Obviously, anything you submit to me has to go to the other parties as well. You understand that. But if you want to circulate something to the other parties without sending it to my office, and then potentially take something back to the council on October 12th, you could do that. I'll give you the option. You can go either way, but the deadline will be October 19. So you'll have time to do that. And yet we're still a little bit before your city council election. So does that make sense to you, Mr. Wolbrandt?
Mr. Lilly, thank you.
All right. I haven't heard from everybody else, but I think I'm trying to sort of formalize this. So, Mr. Kavitstad, I think that covered your comments. Did you have anything else? Did I cut you off before you finished?
No, that covered my concerns and suggestions. So thank you, Mr. Lilly.
Okay, so Ms. Diaz, I'll go to you next. Anything to add for Alisal Guest Ranch?
For Alisal, we'll just say we're definitely firmly still committed to engaging with Solvang in the settlement process and having discussions. I can't represent just in full candor that what we've seen resolves the essence of our protests, but respecting that this isn't really the forum to have the substantive discussion. We respect the deadlines you set to try to move the process along, and we'll do everything we can to try to work to resolve some of the remaining issues within that framework.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're not doing settlement today, at least not in front of me, but I do want to keep encouraging you all to talk. And I know it's hard for the city with 6 different parties to just set up everything for a dialogue, but please keep trying. So Mr. Stroud for the Water Conservation District, any other comments on these issues?
No, I think the proposal that you and Mr. Kvistad made is a good one. I like the idea of seeing the proposed amendments before we start talking about them in this setting again. But again, the parent district more or less defers to the other parties on what it is they need to resolve the disputes between them. We would just like to be able to weigh in on the plan as it evolves.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to move that October 12 deadline to October 19, but Mr. Wolbrandt, you can file it anytime after September 28th that you want to. And this is the deadline for filing the city's additional amendments to the 2015 change petition. And then I'm going to target a 6-month time frame for the city to complete I'm just going to call it updated CEQA document, whatever that might be, that is based on the 2012 EIR, but has whatever revisions or issues that need to be addressed in connection with the amended petition. And I'll set a deadline roughly 6 months down the road. I certainly understand the city's concerns, Mr. Wolbrandt. On the other hand, I understand Mr. Brumback's statement that the city wants this to move forward. So to some extent, the city has both tensions within itself and hopefully can resolve those. I do think we should set another status conference. Since the amended petition is a pretty big step forward and there may be issues associated with that, I think I'll set a status conference for sometime in November. Hopefully it won't need to be as long as today, but I just want to find out where we are and what the plans are moving forward and whether you really have all talked, as I've encouraged you to. I don't want to wait until next year. If we don't do it in November, it gets to be harder to do things in December. So I'm going to target that. I don't know if there are good days or bad days. Today's the 24th. So sometime after the October 19 deadline would make sense. How about, I'm looking at the November 5 or 6 for this. Unless anyone has any objections, I think I'll set this for November 5, again at 9:30 in the morning. Does anybody have any objections to November 5, 9:30 a.m.?
More of a heads up than an objection. I plan to go on maternity leave in November, but it will probably be after that date. But if there is a change of counsel for California trout at that point, that would be why.
Okay, well, congratulations. That's great news. And we hope things go well. And we're not going to wait for the baby before we go forward with the proceedings in this matter, but that's great news. So thank you for letting us know.
The time frame actually might work out well with
It could. We'll see. All right. Well, and I will send out prepare and circulate an order with both the October 19 deadline and what I'm looking for by then, and confirming the November 5 status conference at 9:30 in the morning, and we'll circulate obviously the Zoom information for that. So, and to the extent any of you who are on audio only can get onto video, we certainly like seeing faces. It's don't see people in person anymore, it is nice to do that if you can. So, oh, I did have a couple of other quick things on my list for today, and then I'll ask you if anyone else has anything. Mr. Wolbrand, sorry to keep picking on you, but during the April 29 pre-hearing conference, I mentioned that when we looked at the water board's files, we do not have the city's permittee progress reports for 1995 or 2002. And I think I asked you at that time for you to work with Mr. Broomback to see if you have copies of those reports in the city's files, or if you don't have the actual permittee progress reports, if you can send us a letter with a table of the monthly amounts that the city pumped from its wells that are subject to this water right permit during those 2 years. And I don't think I ever got anything from you. So Mr. Wolbrand, that may have slid through the cracks. Do you know where you are on that one?
Mr. Lilly, and Matt is reminding me, we did send one of those 2 years, which we did find. We haven't yet found the other year. I did get about 10 boxes from the city's former city attorney, which I have tried picking through and didn't see either of those years in those boxes. But as you remind me, I will look again and I'll have Matt resend to everyone the year that we did find.
Do you remember which was the year you did find?
Yeah, not off the top of our head. Matt can fairly quickly look through his, through his sent items.
Okay, yeah, if you, Mr. Vanderlyn, if you can send that to me with CCs to the other parties, email's the easiest for us. You may very well have sent it before. I don't remember receiving it, but I'm not saying we didn't. So please do. And then for the other year, if you don't find the report, if you just have any way to get the data, it just would be nice to round out the city's historical pumping record. The city's permittee progress reports for the other years are all pretty detailed. So I'm hoping the city still has the data for that year. So anyway, I'll put that in the order as well. I'll just put an October 19. Now I probably should put a different deadline just so we don't have confusion. I'll put that one for October 12 for those reports. Thank you. So then there also were some discussions about other parties' requests to Solvang for various documents. I almost hate to bring this up because I'd like you to try to resolve these things internally, but I'll just say, does anyone else have a pending request to Solvang for documents that they think I should get involved in at this time? And, and obviously down the road, we'll be able to circle back to issues of documents and so forth. But I'm just going to ask that question.
This is CDFW, and we'll work with the city to get documents that we've requested and not yet received.
Okay. And again, please talk. Send letters, send emails. Don't just wait for people to, assuming they're going to respond. I'm not criticizing you, Ms. Murray. It's a comment for all of you. Please try to keep talking. It really helps everybody, I think. Okay. That's all I have for today. Is there anything else anyone else would like to bring up today? All right. Well, go ahead, Ms. Hall, please.
One clarifying question. I know we went back and forth on whether and to what extent there will be an internal process on the amended petition. So my understanding is that if that's left to us, so we would, if there's an opportunity to have input, I would just like to know whether the city will be circulating after the 28th, the proposal, and then we could comment, given that they will have an opportunity to go back on October 12th before the 19th deadline. Is that something we decided to just leave open, or did we reach conclusion on that?
I left it open for the city to decide whether or not they want to do that. And but I just put the October 19 deadline so the city will have the opportunity to do that if it wants to. So Mr. Wolbrand, and if you know today, you can tell us whether you plan to do that internal circulation. If you don't know today, you can just say, we're going to wait and see.
Mr. Lilly, I don't know today. Again, I am directed by 5 elected officials who I will be speaking with on Monday, and they will give me guidance.
Okay.
Guidance
I can
may-
certainly relate to that. I'm directed by 5 appointed officials, so I understand that. But I'll just repeat, I think Mr. Kvidstad's suggestion, which others have seconded, is good to basically circulate a draft amendment to the petition. I mean, somebody may just have some real simple thing, could you just add this sentence here or something? And you end up with a petition that's better for everyone moving forward. But I didn't order you to do that. So, and I understand you have to report to a city council. So you can go either way, but I encourage you to do that. And that's why I set the October 19 deadline, to give you time to do that if you and the city decide to. So I'll just leave it at that.
Mr. Lilly, I would note that my approach and Mr. Vanderlinden's approach tend to be to try to be as pragmatic and economic as possible. So to the extent that ends up forwarding those two concepts, I suspect we probably will share things with the other parties to get input, as long as it fits in the overall schedule.
Okay, and I'll just say, from my point of view, I mean, if you file one petition on September 29th and another one on October 19th, we can deal with that, but it sort of gums up the record a little bit. So I'd rather just have the second one after you've met with the parties, assuming you can get that before October 19th. But I'm leaving that up to you to decide. I mean, if you file one petition and then want to amend it a few weeks later, we can deal with that too. So up to you, but I've just told you where I'm coming from. All right, anything else for today? I will, as soon as we can, we will get the order out and obviously email to everyone on the service list and also on our general virus email list, and we'll post it on our webpage as well. So it's a bit of a marathon. Thank you all for bearing with me for 2 hours this morning. And with that, just one last question. Anything else before we hang up? All right. Everybody have a good day, and thank you all very much. I really appreciate everyone's professional attitude toward this. I know that we have some big issues, but I appreciate you're all working professionally to try to come up with a process to address them. So have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
You as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.